When an Amish farmer buys a crumbling barn at a county auction for just $20, he expects nothing more than spare lumber and shelter for his animals. But when his horse paws at the dirt floor, it reveals a hidden chamber filled with relics, Civil War-era gold coins, rare documents, and a forgotten artifact tied to a century-old disappearance. As the farmer struggles to reconcile his simple life with a fortune that could change everything, outsiders, collectors, treasure hunters, and even dangerous opportunists descend upon his quiet Amish community. What started as a bargain purchase becomes a test of faith, tradition, and survival. Could a man who has lived his entire life without electricity, automobiles, or worldly possessions navigate a discovery that threatens to destroy everything he holds sacred? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun had barely cleared the eastern ridge when Jacob Stoltzfus guided his buggy down the long gravel drive toward the main road. His hands, weathered and strong from 52 years of working the land, held the reins with practiced ease. Beside him sat his father, Isaac, a man whose white beard reached nearly to his chest, and whose eyes still held the sharp clarity of someone who had lived through 9 decades of principled living. "You are certain about this auction, Jacob?" Isaac asked, his voice carrying the gentle Pennsylvania Dutch accent that marked their heritage. "It is not our way to seek after English business." Jacob nodded slowly, watching the familiar landscape roll past. The fields were their fields, worked by Stoltzfus hands for 4 generations. The farmhouses they passed belonged to families whose names he had known since childhood. This was the rhythm of life in Lancaster County, unchanged and unchanging, or so it seemed to those who lived within its careful boundaries. "The farm needs repair, father. The north barn is failing, and we have no timber. $20 for salvage wood is prudent, not prideful." Isaac grunted, neither approval nor disapproval, but acknowledgement. They rode in comfortable silence, the clip-clop of the horses' hooves marking time like a metronome. Jacob's mind wandered to his wife Sarah, who had risen before dawn to prepare breakfast for their household. She had said nothing when he announced his intention to attend the county auction, but her eyes had held questions. Sarah always had questions, though she asked few of them aloud. The auction yard sat on the outskirts of town, where the Amish world brushed against the English one. Cars filled the parking area, their metal bodies glinting in the morning light like a school of strange fish. Jacob guided his buggy to the designated area where other plain folk had gathered, recognizing neighbors and distant cousins among them. Levi Byler raised a hand in greeting. He was younger than Jacob by a decade, with a thick dark beard and the robust build of a man who still did the heavy work himself. "Jacob, I did not expect to see you here." "Timber," Jacob said simply, tying his horse to the rail. "The north barn." Levi nodded, understanding. Every farmer knew the calculus of necessity. "I heard they are selling the old Hartwell property pieces. That barn has been empty 40 years or more, maybe longer." The name Hartwell stirred something in Jacob's memory, a fragment of local history half remembered from childhood stories. The Hartwell estate had once been substantial, back before the Civil War, but the family had vanished or died out. The land had been parceled and sold over the decades, leaving only scattered remnants. The auctioneer was a lean man, with a voice that carried across the yard like a bell. He worked through smaller lots first. Tools, equipment, household goods. Jacob watched the rhythm of it, the call and response, the raising of hands or numbered paddles. His father stood beside him, silent and observing, missing nothing. When the barn came up for bid, the auctioneer's description was brief and honest. Lot 47, the standing structure on the former Hartwell South parcel, buyer responsible for removal or demolition. Structure is unsound, sold as salvage only. A few people laughed. The barn was indeed a sorry sight in the photographs displayed on the board. Its roof sagged dramatically, Its walls leaned at precarious angles, and vegetation grew thick around its foundation. Jacob studied the images carefully. The frame looked to be original oak, heavy timber that would still be sound at the core despite surface decay. The siding, if carefully removed, could be repurposed. Even the old hardware had value to someone who knew how to work metal. "Do I hear $10?" the auctioneer called. Silence. Someone in the back made a joke about kindling. $5 then. "Come now, folks. That is good lumber in there." More silence. Jacob felt his father's attention shift to him, a question without words. $5, Jacob said, raising his hand. The auctioneer pointed at him. "5 from the gentleman. Do I hear 10? Nothing." The crowd had already moved on mentally to the next lot, something more promising than a collapsing barn. Going once at $5. Going twice. The auctioneer's gavel hovered. "Do I hear 10? Someone called from the side. Jacob turned to see a young English man in work clothes. Probably a contractor looking for the same salvage value Jacob had spotted. $10, thank you. Do I hear 15? Jacob raised his hand again. 15. The young contractor shrugged and stepped back. The auctioneer looked around once more, his practiced eyes sweeping the crowd for any final interest. 15 going once. 15 going twice. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Sold to bidder 73 for $15. Jacob felt his father's hand on his shoulder, a gesture of approval or perhaps merely acknowledgement. As they made their way to the payment table, Levi Byler caught up with them, shaking his head with a smile. "You got yourself a project there, Jacob. That barn looks ready to fall if you sneeze near it." "The frame is oak," Jacob replied. 160 years old, maybe more. They do not build like that anymore." At the payment table, the clerk processed his paperwork with efficient disinterest. She barely glanced at him as she stamped the documents. $15 plus $5 processing fee. $20 total. Jacob counted out the bills from his worn leather wallet. Money earned from carpentry work he did for English customers in town. The Amish community took care of its own, but cash money still had its necessities. The clerk handed him a receipt and a copy of the deed description. "Property must be cleared within 90 days, she said, already looking past him to the next buyer. "Any materials left after that become county property again." The ride home took longer than the journey out. Isaac dozed in his seat, the morning's excursion having tired him more than he would admit. Jacob held the reins loosely, letting the horse find its own pace. His mind turned over the purchase, examining it from different angles, the way a carpenter examines a piece of wood before cutting. $20 for a barn. Sarah would have questions. Certainly, not criticism, for that was not her way, but she would want to understand his thinking. Their eldest son, Daniel, would help with the dismantling work. The boy was 28 now, married to Rachel, living in the smaller house on the property that Jacob had built for them when they wed. Daniel had his father's way with wood and his mother's steady temperament. The farm came into view as they crested the last hill. 140 acres of gently rolling land, split between crops and pasture. The main house stood solid and white, built by Jacob's grandfather in night. Beside it, the newer house where Daniel and Rachel lived. Beyond those, the barns and outbuildings that made up the working heart of the farm. Sarah was in the garden when Jacob brought the buggy around. She straightened from her weeding, one hand pressed to the small of her back, and watched him help Isaac down from the seat. She was 50 years old, her face lined but serene, her hair hidden beneath her prayer covering. They had been married 32 years, and Jacob could read her expressions as easily as he read the grain in a piece of wood. "You bought something," she said. "Not a question. A barn. For salvage. How much?" $20. She absorbed this information, her eyes never leaving his face. "Is it close?" "Half a day's journey. I will need Daniel and the wagon. Perhaps a week's work to dismantle it properly." Sarah nodded and returned to her weeding. The conversation was complete. She trusted his judgment, and he had not violated any principle of their faith or community. Later, over supper, there would be time for more details. For now, the acknowledgement was enough. Jacob unhitched the horse and led it to water. The animal drank deeply, its sides heaving gently from the long pull. As Jacob brushed him down, his thoughts kept returning to the barn, to the weathered photographs the auctioneer had displayed. There had been something in those images, something beyond the obvious decay and salvage value. The Hartwell name carried weight in local history, though Jacob could not quite grasp why. His formal education had ended at 8th grade, as was proper for the Amish, but he had always possessed a curiosity about the land and its stories. Old Isaac would know. His father's memory reached back to the previous century, to stories told by his own grandparents, who had lived through the Civil War years. That evening, after supper, Jacob sat with his father on the front porch. The sun descended slowly, painting the fields gold and amber. Isaac rocked in his chair, smoking his pipe, the sweet tobacco scent drifting on the still air. "The Hartwell barn," Jacob said quietly. "Do you remember the family?" Isaac was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. "Before my time, mostly," Isaac finally said. "But my grandfather spoke of them. English folk, wealthy by the standards of those days. They had land, considerable land, stretching from the old post road clear to Miller's Creek. The barn you bought, that would have been on the southern edge of their holdings. What happened to them?" Isaac drew on his pipe, considering. "There was a daughter, Elizabeth, I think her name was. She disappeared during the war years, 1864 or thereabouts. Some said she ran off, others claimed foul play. The family never recovered from it. The father died not long after. The mother followed within a year. No heirs, so the land was sold off, in pieces." Jacob watched the last light fade from the sky. 160 years was a long time for a building to stand, longer still for a mystery to remain unsolved. But the land remembered, the structures remembered. He had seen it before in his carpentry work, old houses that held the echoes of their builders, old barns that bore the marks of long-dead hands. "I will go tomorrow to see it properly," Jacob said. "Daniel will come with me." Isaac nodded. "Take care with it, son. Old structures can be treacherous. The wood may look sound and prove rotten at the core." The next morning broke clear and cool, autumn beginning to assert itself after the long summer. Jacob and Daniel loaded the wagon with tools, crowbars, hammers, handsaws, rope, and a sturdy ladder. Sarah packed them food enough for the day, wrapping cheese and bread and cold chicken in clean cloth. Daniel was a younger version of his father, though taller and broader through the shoulder. His beard was still dark, not yet touched by grey, and his hands bore the calluses of constant work. He had inherited his father's deliberate way of moving, never rushed but never idle. "Rachel asked if the lumber is for our addition," Daniel said as they set out, the wagon creaking under its load. Jacob smiled slightly. His daughter-in-law had been hinting for months about expanding their small house, especially now with their first child expected in the spring. If the timber is sound, there will be enough for many projects. The journey took them through familiar country at first, then into areas Jacob knew less well. The roads here were older, less traveled, lined with overgrown fence rows and abandoned orchards. The Hartwell property sat at the end of a rutted lane, half hidden by sumac and wild grapevines. When the barn finally came into view, Daniel let out a low whistle. "Father, are you certain this is safe to enter?" Jacob studied the structure with a carpenter's eye. The photographs had not lied. The barn leaned significantly to the south, its roof sagging in the middle like an old horse's back. The main doors hung askew on rusted hinges. Windows, if there had been any, were long gone. Vegetation had claimed the foundation, and a young maple tree grew directly through what had once been a loading platform. Yet beneath the decay, Jacob could see the bones of good construction. The main posts were massive timbers, hand-hewn from oak. The mortise and tenon joints, where visible, showed the precision of craftsmen who had built to last. The foundation stones were limestone, quarried locally, still square and true despite more than a century of weathering. "We will start slowly," Jacob said, climbing down from the wagon. "First, we assess, then we plan. Only then do we act." They approached carefully, testing each board before putting weight on it. Inside, the barn was dim and musty, smelling of old hay and bird droppings, and slow decay. Pigeons scattered from the rafters at their intrusion. Light came through gaps in the walls, creating dusty beams that illuminated the emptiness. The floor was packed earth, worn smooth by generations of use. Stalls lined one wall, their dividers made of the same heavy oak as the frame. At the far end, a loft still held remnants of ancient hay, crumbling to dust at a touch. Jacob moved through the space methodically, examining joints, testing timbers with his knife, checking for rot and insect damage. Daniel followed, taking mental notes of his father's assessment. It was how they had always worked, teacher and student, father and son. "The main frame is solid," Jacob announced after an hour of inspection. "The outer siding is mostly rot, but the core timbers are still good. We can salvage perhaps 60% of the wood, maybe more." They broke for lunch in the shade of an old walnut tree near the barn. Sarah's food tasted better in the open air, and they ate in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the autumn sky. A hawk circled high overhead, riding the thermals with motionless wings. "There are stories about this place," Daniel said eventually. "The English boys in town, they say it is haunted." Jacob wiped his hands on his trousers. "Old places always gather stories. It is the nature of things." But the Hartwell girl, Elizabeth, grandfather Isaac said she disappeared. "Many people disappeared during the war years," Jacob replied. "It was a hard time. Soldiers passing through, refugees, deserters. The country was tearing itself apart." Daniel nodded, but did not look convinced. He had always been more susceptible to superstition than Jacob liked, a trait inherited perhaps from Rachel's side of the family. Still, he was a good worker and a faithful man, and those qualities mattered more than a tendency toward ghost stories. They spent the afternoon making a detailed plan. Jacob sketched rough diagrams in a small notebook he carried, marking which timbers could be removed first, which walls needed to be supported during dismantling, where the weak points lay. It would take at least a week, possibly two, working carefully and safely. As the sun began its descent, they prepared to leave. Jacob wanted one final look at the main frame before they departed, to fix the details in his mind for the night's planning. He walked the perimeter of the interior one last time, his hand trailing along the old wood. That was when he noticed Thunder, acting strangely. Thunder was their oldest horse, a massive Belgian draft animal, with a calm temperament that bordered on laziness. Jacob had brought him because he was steady and reliable, not given to spooking at shadows or strange places. But now Thunder stood at the entrance to the barn, his head lowered, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. "Easy, boy," Jacob murmured, approaching slowly. The horse took a step forward into the barn, something he had refused to do all day despite their coax. He moved to the center of the floor space, to a spot that looked no different from any other packed earth, and began pawing at the ground. Daniel appeared at Jacob's shoulder. "What is he doing?" "I do not know." Jacob watched as Thunder pawed again, more insistent this time. The action was deliberate, focused, unlike the random movement of a bored animal. The horse's hoof struck the earth, with a hollow sound that made Jacob's breath catch. "Daniel, bring the lantern." The late afternoon sun provided less light inside the barn than Jacob needed. Daniel returned quickly with the kerosene lantern from the wagon, and Jacob held it close to the ground where Thunder had been digging. The horse had scraped away enough dirt to reveal something beneath, something that caught the lamplight with a dull gleam. Jacob knelt, brushing away more earth with his hand. His fingers touched metal, cold and solid. He worked carefully, widening the area, and gradually a shape emerged from the packed floor. It was a ring, brass by the look of it, tarnished nearly black with age, but unmistakably crafted by human hands. and it was attached to something, a handle of some kind, set flush with the floor. "Father," Daniel's voice held an edge of tension. "What is that?" Jacob traced the outline of the ring with his fingertips. Around it, now that he knew to look, he could see the faint rectangular outline of a trapdoor, its edges filled with more than a century of accumulated dirt. The wood of the door itself was so perfectly flush with the floor that it had been invisible until Thunder's insistent pawing had revealed it. "A cellar, perhaps," Jacob said, though his voice lacked conviction. Barns sometimes had root cellars or storage pits, but something about this felt different. The craftsmanship of the door, the precision of its fitting, spoke of something meant to be hidden rather than merely stored. Daniel set the lantern down with a hand that trembled slightly. "Should we open it?" Jacob sat back on his heels, considering. The practical part of his mind catalogued the risks. The structure above them was unsound. Whatever lay beneath could be unstable after so many years. There might be nothing at all, just an old storage space long since emptied and forgotten. Yet curiosity pulled at him, a feeling he recognized but rarely indulged. "We will look," he said finally, but carefully. He worked the brass ring with both hands, feeling it resist at first, then gradually loosen as rust and dirt gave way. Daniel helped, and together they pulled. The door lifted with a groan of aged wood, hinges protesting after more than a century of disuse. A rush of cold air emerged from the opening, carrying the scent of earth and stone and something else, something dry and preserved. Jacob held the lantern over the opening. Stone steps descended into darkness, perhaps 8 or 10 of them, leading to what appeared to be a chamber below. The walls were lined with brick, still sound from what he could see, and the space seemed deliberately constructed rather than naturally occurring. "I am going down," Jacob said. "Father, we should come back tomorrow with more light, more help. Tomorrow is the Sabbath. We will not work, and I cannot leave this open and unguarded." Jacob tested the first step with his weight. The stone held firm. "Stay up here. If anything happens, you go for help." He descended slowly, holding the lantern before him. Each step was solid, cut from limestone, and set with the same precision as the foundation above. At the bottom, the chamber opened into a space perhaps 12 feet square, with a ceiling just high enough for Jacob to stand upright. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves sat wooden crates, metal boxes, and various containers, all covered with the fine dust of years. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest. This was no simple root cellar. This was a hiding place, a vault, constructed with care and sealed with intention. He moved the lantern slowly, taking in the contents. Some of the crates bore military markings, faded but still legible. Others were unmarked. Glass jars lined one shelf, their contents dark and unidentifiable in the dim light. On a small table against the far wall sat a leather satchel, its surface cracked with age, but still intact. Beside it a wooden box bound with iron straps, and scattered across the table's surface, catching the lamplight like small suns, were coins. Gold coins. "Father," Daniel's voice floated down from above, tight with worry. "What do you see?" Jacob could not immediately answer. He reached out with a trembling hand and picked up one of the coins. It was heavy, real, stamped with the eagle and shield of the United States. He turned it over. $20, a double eagle, minted during the first year of the Civil War. "Daniel," he called up, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. "Go to the wagon, bring the empty grain sacks and more rope." "What is down there?" "Just do as I ask, please." He heard Daniel's footsteps retreat, then return several minutes later. Jacob climbed back up, his legs unsteady, and took the materials his son offered. Daniel's eyes searched his face in the fading light. "We cannot speak of this," Jacob said quietly. "Not yet. Not until I understand what we have found." "Is it valuable?" Jacob thought of the gold coins, of the sealed boxes and military crates. "I believe it may be, which is why we must be cautious." We must think carefully about what to do. They covered the trapdoor again, replacing the dirt and smoothing it as best they could in the gathering darkness. Jacob took note of nearby landmarks, measurements, anything that would help him find the exact spot again. Then they loaded their tools and drove home in silence. Thunder, pulling the wagon with his usual placid strength, unaware of the trouble his curiosity had unearthed. The journey home felt longer than the morning's trip. Jacob's mind churned with questions and concerns. The ordnung, the unwritten rules that governed Amish life, did not specifically address finding hidden treasure, but the principles were clear. Worldly wealth was a snare. Pride came before destruction. What belonged to Caesar should be rendered unto Caesar. Yet the coins were old, more than a century and a half old. Whatever government or person had placed them there was long gone. The laws of property and inheritance in the English world were complicated, full of statutes and clauses that Jacob only dimly understood. But more pressing than legal questions were moral ones. If he claimed what he had found, would it not be a form of theft? Yet if he reported it to the authorities, would the items end up in the hands of people who had no connection to them, no right to them? And underneath all these practical concerns ran a deeper current of unease. The chamber had been sealed deliberately. Someone had gone to great effort to hide these things, to preserve them in secret. Perhaps there had been good reason for that secrecy. Perhaps there still was. Full darkness had fallen by the time they reached home. Sarah met them at the barn, her face illuminated by the lamp she carried. She looked from Jacob to Daniel and back again, reading something in their silence that troubled her. "Put Thunder up," she said to Daniel, "then go home to Rachel. Your father and I need to speak." Daniel obeyed without question, though Jacob saw him glance back once before disappearing into the shadows. Sarah waited until they were alone, standing in the small circle of lamplight like an island in a sea of darkness. "What happened?" Her voice was level, but firm. Jacob had never been able to lie to his wife, nor had he ever wanted to. In 32 years of marriage, they had built their relationship on honesty, even when honesty was difficult. He told her everything, speaking quietly but completely, describing the trapdoor, the chamber, the gold coins, the sealed boxes. Sarah listened without interrupting, her face growing more troubled with each detail. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. A barn owl called from somewhere in the fields, its voice lonely and strange. Finally, Sarah reached out and took his hand, something she rarely did outside the privacy of their home. "This is a heavy thing you have found," she said. "Too heavy to carry alone. I do not know what to do." "You know what you must do. You must seek counsel. Tomorrow after worship, you will speak with Bishop Ei." Jacob nodded slowly. He had known this was the answer, even before asking, but hearing Sarah say it made it real. Bishop Ei was a wise man, 70 years old, who had led their district for 2 decades. If anyone could provide guidance through this moral thicket, it would be him. That night, Jacob barely slept. He lay beside Sarah in their bed, listening to her steady breathing, watching shadows move across the ceiling as clouds passed over the moon. His mind kept returning to the chamber, to the weight of that gold coin in his hand, to the implications of what lay hidden beneath a barn floor. He thought of his children, Daniel and his 3 siblings, all grown now, all married and starting families of their own. He thought of the farm, of the struggles they faced each year to make ends meet. The equipment was aging, the barns needed constant repair, and the land itself required investments they could barely afford. Even a fraction of what lay in that chamber could transform their lives, could secure the future for generations to come. But at what cost? The Amish way was separation from the world, simplicity over complexity, faith over fortune. They rejected the pursuit of wealth, not because money itself was evil, but because the love of it corrupted the soul. Jacob had seen it happen to others, English neighbors who had come into sudden wealth through inheritance or business success. The money changed them, made them anxious and suspicious, broke apart families and friendships. It was a poison disguised as blessing, yet surely God's providence had led him to this discovery. Surely there was some purpose in it beyond mere temptation. Perhaps the contents of the chamber were meant to be found, meant to serve some greater good. Perhaps keeping silent about it would be the greater sin. These thoughts chased themselves in circles until dawn light began to show through the window. Sarah stirred beside him, instantly awake as she always was, her eyes finding his face in the growing light. "You did not sleep," she said. "No." She touched his cheek with her palm, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. "Today we will find wisdom. Bishop Eli will help us understand what God requires." Sunday worship was held at the Byler farm that week, as it rotated among the families of the district. 200 people gathered in the large barn that Levi had cleaned and prepared for the occasion. The benches were arranged in careful rows, men on one side, women on the other, children seated with their parents. The service lasted 3 hours, conducted entirely in Pennsylvania Dutch, with hymns sung slowly from the Osbund, the ancient hymnal that had been used by their ancestors for 400 years. Jacob tried to focus on the sermon, on Bishop Eli's words about faithfulness and stewardship, but his mind kept drifting back to the hidden chamber. He felt like a man carrying a secret too large for his body, as if everyone around him must surely see it written on his face. But the service proceeded as it always did, familiar and comforting in its unchanging rhythm. After the final prayer, the benches were rearranged, and the meal was served. Jacob waited until the community had settled into their conversations and fellowship before approaching Bishop Eli. The older man was speaking with several farmers about the coming harvest, his white beard moving as he gestured with his hands. "Bishop," Jacob said quietly, "might I have a word, in private?" Eli's eyes, still sharp despite his years, studied Jacob's face. Whatever he saw there made him nod immediately. "Of course, we will walk." They left the barn and headed across the fields, following a worn path that led toward a small pond at the edge of the Byler property. Other men might have asked immediately what troubled Jacob, but Eli understood the value of silence. He waited, letting the walk itself create space for difficult words. "I have found something," Jacob began, "something that troubles me greatly." He told the story as he had told Sarah, leaving nothing out. Eli listened with the same patient attention he brought to all matters, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes on the path ahead. When Jacob finished, they had reached the pond. Eli stood looking at the water, watching a family of ducks paddle near the far shore. "This is indeed a heavy matter," Eli said finally. "You were right to come to me. Such a discovery raises questions that touch the very heart of our faith." "I do not know what to do," Jacob admitted. "My first thought is that I should report it to the authorities. Let the English world deal with the English world's treasures." "That would be the simple path," Eli agreed, "and perhaps the safest. Yet I wonder if God has placed this in your hands for a reason." He turned to face Jacob directly. "Tell me, what do you know of what you found? You mentioned military markings, Civil War-era coins, but what else?" "I only saw it briefly. There were boxes, crates, papers perhaps. I didn't examine everything." "Then that must be your first step. Before we can know what God requires of us, we must understand what has been entrusted to us. These items have been hidden for more than a century and a half. A few more days will not matter. Take time to examine what is there. Make an inventory. See if there are any documents that explain their purpose or their ownership." Jacob felt a measure of relief at having a clear direction. "You think I should not report it immediately? I think that hasty action often leads to poor outcomes," Eli said carefully. "We must be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. If these items have historical value, if they tell a story that has been lost, then we have a responsibility to understand that story before we decide what must be done. But Jacob, you must proceed with caution. Take Daniel with you. perhaps Levi as well. Men you trust, and if at any time you feel that what you are doing is wrong, stop immediately and seek counsel again." They walked back to the gathering in companionable silence. Jacob felt the weight on his shoulders ease slightly, not removed, but shared. He was not alone in this burden. The following morning, Jacob, Daniel, and Levi returned to the barn with better equipment. They brought multiple lanterns, sturdy rope, and canvas sacks for transporting whatever they might find. Levi had been told only that they needed help moving some items from the barn, and if he was curious about the secrecy, he kept it to himself. When they uncovered the trapdoor and Levi saw what lay beneath, his expression shifted from curiosity to stunned disbelief. "Jacob, what have you gotten yourself into?" "I do not know yet," Jacob replied honestly. "That is what we are here to discover." They descended one at a time, careful not to overcrowd the small space. In the fuller light of 3 lanterns, the chamber revealed more details. The brick walls were professionally laid, the mortar still intact. The shelves were constructed from the same oak as the barn above, proving they had been built at the same time. Everything about the space spoke of careful planning and substantial investment. Jacob began with the leather satchel on the table. He opened it carefully, conscious of the material's fragility. Inside were papers, documents protected from moisture by the leather and the sealed chamber. He lifted the first one out with gentle hands. It was a journal, bound in leather, that had once been fine but was now stiff and darkened with age. The handwriting inside was elegant, practiced, the ink faded to brown but still legible. Jacob turned to the first page and read aloud. "Captain William Hargrove, 12th Pennsylvania Cavalry, March 1863. Levy let out a low breath. "A soldier's diary. The Hartwell estate," Daniel said. Grandfather Isaac said there was a connection to the Civil War. Jacob turned the pages slowly, scanning the entries. The captain wrote of battles and marches, of men lost and missions completed. But there were also passages of a more personal nature, references to Lancaster County, to a property he was guarding, to someone he called only E in his entries. One passage, dated June 1863, caught Jacob's attention. "I have secured the items as instructed. The hiding place is well concealed beneath the southern barn, known only to myself and E. Should anything happen to either of us, this record will serve as testimony to what has occurred here, and why such measures were necessary. The documents in the iron box must be preserved at all costs. They represent not merely wealth, but justice and truth that powerful men would see buried forever." Jacob read the passage twice, then looked at his companions. "There is more here than treasure. There is a story, perhaps an important one." They spent the next hour carefully examining the contents of the chamber. The gold coins numbered over 400, all double eagles dated between. The military crates contained uniforms, weapons and equipment, all preserved in remarkable condition by the dry air of the sealed chamber. Glass jars held documents wrapped in oilcloth, protected against moisture and decay. But it was the iron box that drew Jacob's attention most forcefully. It was perhaps 18 inches long, 12 inches wide, and 8 inches deep, bound with iron straps and secured with a lock that had rusted solid over the decades. The box was heavy, far heavier than its size suggested, as if it contained something of substantial weight. "We should open it," Daniel said. "Not here," Jacob decided. "We will take it home along with the journal and some of the documents. The rest can stay for now. We need time to understand what we are dealing with before we move everything." Levi, who had been mostly quiet during the examination, spoke up. "Jacob, you know this cannot remain secret for long. People will talk. They always do. And when the English world learns of this, there will be trouble." "I know," Jacob replied, "but we must proceed carefully. Bishop Eli counseled wisdom, and that is what I intend to practice." They selected several items to take with them. The journal, carefully wrapped in clean cloth, a bundle of documents from one of the jars, the iron box which required both Daniel and Levi to lift, and a small leather pouch containing a sampling of the gold coins, so Bishop Eli could see for himself what they had found. Before they sealed the chamber again, Jacob took one more look around. The space seemed smaller than it had before, more confined, as if the weight of what they had discovered pressed down from above. He thought of Captain Hargrove writing his journal entries by candlelight, carefully sealing these items away, trusting that someday the truth he spoke of would emerge. The man had been dead for more than 150 years, yet his words and his mission had survived, waiting patiently in the darkness for someone to find them. That evening, Jacob sat at his kitchen table with the journal spread before him. Sarah worked quietly at the stove, preparing supper, but her attention was on her husband and the old book he studied with such intensity. Daniel and Rachel had joined them. Understanding that letter Jacob had found required family counsel. Jacob read passages aloud, his voice measured and calm despite the remarkable nature of the words. Captain Hargrove wrote of being assigned to special duty in Lancaster County in early. He had been tasked with protecting certain documents and valuables that had been entrusted to a local family, the Hartwells, for safekeeping. The nature of these documents was never explicitly stated, but Hargrove referred to them as evidence of criminal activity by powerful railroad interests. "Listen to this entry," Jacob said, finding a page marked by his finger. July 14, 1863. Aegis agreed to marry me when this business is concluded. Her father has given his blessing, though he worries for our safety. The men who seek what we protect are ruthless and well-connected. I have moved the items to the hiding place we prepared beneath the southern barn. E alone knows where they are hidden, should anything happen to me. E must be Elizabeth Hartwell, Sarah said softly. The daughter your father spoke of, the one who disappeared, Daniel added, his voice uneasy. Jacob turned to the final entries in the journal. The last one was dated August 20, 1863. I have been called back to my regiment. We march tomorrow for Virginia. E and I were married this morning by her father in a private ceremony. She wears my mother's ring. I have told her that if I do not return, she must find a way to bring the truth to light. The documents in the iron box will prove everything. I pray God protects her until that day comes. The journal ended there. No further entries, no indication of what had happened to Captain Hargrove or to Elizabeth. Jacob closed the book gently, as if the pages themselves were fragile bones that might crumble at rough handling. He did not return, Rachel said quietly, and neither did she bring the truth to light. Because she disappeared, Daniel added. Grandfather Isaac said it was in 1864, the following year. Whatever happened to her, it prevented her from completing her husband's mission. Sarah came to the table and sat down across from Jacob, her hands folded before her in an attitude that reminded him of prayer. So this is not merely about treasure. It is about justice that was never served, truth that was never told. And now, after all these years, it has fallen to you to decide what to do with it. Jacob nodded slowly. The weight of that responsibility settled over him like a physical thing, pressing on his shoulders and bowing his back. He was a simple farmer, a carpenter, a man who had lived his entire life within the boundaries of his faith and community. He knew how to build barns and plant fields and raise children in the way they should go. But he did not know how to untangle mysteries that reached back through generations, how to challenge powerful interests that had kept secrets for more than a century. We need to open that iron box, Daniel said. Whatever is inside, it is the key to understanding all of this. Tomorrow, Jacob agreed. We will work on the lock tomorrow. But for now we must be careful. Levi was right, that this cannot remain secret much longer. Already people will have noticed our trips to the barn, our unusual behavior. Word spreads quickly in a community like ours. Rachel spoke for the first time. Then perhaps it is time to involve someone who knows the English laws and ways, someone who can help you understand what legal rights you have, what obligations. Jacob considered this. The Amish generally avoided the legal system, preferring to settle disputes within the community through the council of bishops and elders. Martha stood and paced to the window, looking out at the street where tourists and locals moved about their daily business. "I know an attorney," she said finally. "Rebecca Hoffman. She specializes in historical property cases, estate law, things of that nature. She worked on the Fitzgerald land dispute 2 years ago, the one involving the old mill property. She is honest, discreet, and she understands the importance of preserving historical integrity over pure monetary gain. Can you arrange a meeting? I can do better than that. I can come with you back to your farm, and we can examine what you have found together. Then we can decide whether involving an attorney is necessary and what the next steps should be." Jacob hesitated. Bringing an outsider to his home, sharing these secrets with someone beyond the community, felt like crossing a threshold that could not be uncrossed. But he thought of Captain Hargrove's words, of the truth that needed to be told, of justice delayed for more than a century. Some responsibilities transcended the boundaries of community and required engagement with the wider world, uncomfortable as that might be. "Tomorrow," he said, "come tomorrow afternoon. Bring whatever tools you need to examine old documents properly. And Miss Teen, I must ask for your complete discretion. No one can know about this yet, not until we understand what we are dealing with." "You have my word," Martha said solemnly. "And Jacob, thank you for trusting me with this. It is not a trust I take lightly." Jacob drove home slowly, taking the long route that passed through farmland rather than town. Martha Keene arrived the following afternoon in her modest sedan, parking beside the barn where Jacob waited. She carried a leather case filled with archival supplies, cotton gloves, acid-free folders, a magnifying glass, and a digital camera for documentation. Jacob led her to the workshop he maintained in a smaller outbuilding, where he had arranged the items from the chamber on a long work table. Sarah brought tea and bread, her presence a quiet reassurance that this meeting had the family's blessing. Daniel stood near the door, his role more guardian than participant, watching with the protective instincts of a son who worried for his father's safety. Martha approached the table slowly, her hands already encased in the white cotton gloves. She examined the journal first, turning pages with reverent care, occasionally pausing to photograph entries with Jacob's permission. Then she moved to the documents they had removed from the glass jars, unfolding them with painstaking gentleness. "These are incredible," she murmured. "Military correspondence, property deeds, financial records, all from the Civil War period, all remarkably well preserved." She looked up at Jacob. "But the iron box, that is what Captain Hargrove emphasized in his journal. That is what we need to open." The box sat at the center of the table, its rusted lock defying their earlier attempts to open it. Jacob had tried his locksmith tools, but the mechanism was frozen solid, and he feared damaging whatever lay inside if he forced it. "I know someone who might help," Martha said, "a conservator at the State Museum. He works with antique locks and mechanisms. If anyone can open this without destroying it, he can." "How long would that take?" "A few days, perhaps a week. But Jacob, before we involve anyone else, we should photograph everything we have so far, create a complete record. If something happens, if these items are lost or stolen, at least we will have documentation." They spent the next 2 hours carefully cataloging and photographing each item. Martha worked with professional efficiency, but Jacob could see the excitement barely contained beneath her calm exterior. This was her life's work, the preservation and understanding of history, and she had stumbled into a discovery that historians only dreamed about. As she was packing her equipment, a buggy turned into the drive. Jacob recognized it immediately as belonging to David Kepler, the younger farmer he had seen at the auction. David was 35, ambitious in a way that sometimes created friction within the community. He owned a prosperous farm on the eastern edge of the district, and often spoke of modernizing certain practices in ways that made the elders uncomfortable. David tied his horse and approached with a directness that bordered on rudeness. Jacob, I heard you have been making trips to that old barn you bought, taking things away in wagons. People are talking. People always talk, Jacob replied evenly. They are saying you found something valuable. They are saying you are keeping it secret from the community. David's eyes flickered to Martha, to her camera and equipment, then back to Jacob. Is it true? Jacob considered his response carefully. Lying was not in his nature, but neither did he owe David Kepler a detailed explanation. I found some old items. I am trying to understand what they are and what should be done with them. If you found treasure on property you bought, that treasure belongs to you. You should sell it, take the money, use it for your family. David's voice carried an edge of resentment. Unless you think you are better than the rest of us, too holy to accept God's providence. It is not about being holy, Jacob said quietly. It is about being careful. These items have a history, possibly an important one. I will not act rashly out of greed or fear. David's jaw tightened. You will regret this caution, Jacob. When word gets out, and it will get out, you will have more trouble than you can handle. People will come, outsiders. They will not care about your careful consideration. They will only care about what you have found. He left without waiting for a response, his buggy kicking up dust as he drove away with unnecessary speed. Martha watched the buggy disappear down the road, her expression troubled. He is right about one thing. Once this becomes public knowledge, you will face pressures you cannot imagine. People who deal in antiquities can be persistent, sometimes dangerously so, and if there truly is something of historical importance in that iron box, powerful interests may become involved. Then we must move quickly, Jacob said. Contact your conservator friend. Have him come here if possible, or I will bring the box to him if necessary. We need to know what we are protecting before we can decide how to protect it. That evening, after Martha had departed, Jacob called a family meeting. His 4 children gathered around the kitchen table with their spouses. His father, Isaac, sat in the corner rocker, silent but attentive. Sarah served coffee and pie, the ritual of hospitality creating a framework for difficult conversation. Jacob told them everything, holding nothing back. He passed around photographs Martha had taken, let them examine the gold coins he had kept as samples, read them passages from Captain Hargrove's journal. When he finished, the room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. His second son, Amish, spoke first. Father, this is beyond our ability to manage. You should contact the authorities, let them handle it. And what will they do? His daughter Ruth asked. They will take everything, put it in some museum basement, and we will never know if justice was served for Elizabeth Hartwell and her captain. Justice is not our responsibility, Amish countered. We are called to live simply, peacefully. This discovery threatens that peace. Daniel, who had been present for everything from the beginning, shook his head. It is already too late for that. The discovery has been made. Now we must deal with the consequences, not run from them. Isaac's voice cut through the debate, quiet but carrying authority earned through 9 decades of faithful living. When I was young, during the Depression, our community faced a similar choice. The government wanted to force us to participate in certain programs, to accept help that came with conditions we could not accept. The elders at that time chose to stand firm on principle, even though it would have been easier to compromise. They believed that some things are worth defending, regardless of the cost. Everyone turned to look at the old man. He gazed back at them with eyes that had seen much and judged little. Jacob has found something that was hidden by people who believed in truth strongly enough to risk their lives protecting it. To simply hand it over to strangers without first understanding it would be to dishonor their sacrifice, but to claim it for personal gain would be equally wrong. You must find the middle path, the way that serves both truth and principle. Jacob felt grateful for his father's wisdom. That is what I am trying to do. Martha is helping us understand what we have. Once we know, we can make proper decisions. but I need the family's support. If the community turns against us because of this, I need to know you will stand with me." One by one his children nodded. Even Amos, though reluctantly, agreed. Family loyalty ran deep, stronger even than personal reservations. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A sleek black car pulled into the farm's drive, an unusual sight that drew attention from the children playing in the yard. A man emerged, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed absurdly out of place against the backdrop of the barn and fields. He was perhaps 50, with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Jacob was in the workshop when Daniel came to fetch him. "Father, there is an Englishman here to see you. He says his name is Thomas Brennan. He says he is an antiquities dealer from Philadelphia." Jacob's stomach tightened. David Kepler's warning had proven prophetic faster than expected. Word had spread, and now the outside world was arriving at his doorstep. He wiped his hands on his work apron and walked to the house, where the stranger waited on the porch. "Mr. Stoltzfus." Brennan extended his hand with a practiced smile. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. I heard through the network of dealers and collectors that you may have come into possession of some interesting historical items. I wanted to introduce myself and perhaps discuss the possibility of making you an offer." Jacob did not take the offered hand. It was not rudeness but caution. "I do not know what you have heard, Mr. Brennan, but I have made no decisions about anything. I am still examining what I found." Brennan lowered his hand smoothly, unbothered by the rejection. Of course. I completely understand. These things take time, especially when dealing with items of historical significance. But please, let me assure you that I represent serious buyers, people who appreciate the value of authentic Civil War memorabilia. Whatever you have found, I can guarantee you the best possible price. I am not interested in selling. Not yet, perhaps. But Mr. Stoltzfus, with respect, you are a farmer. These items require expertise to evaluate properly, to authenticate, to present to the right buyers. I have been in this business for 30 years. I know every major collector, every museum curator, every auction house that matters. I can help you navigate this world that I suspect is quite foreign to you." There was something in Brennan's manner that troubled Jacob. The smile was too smooth, the words too practiced. This was a man who made his living convincing people to part with valuable things, and he was very good at his job. But there was also something beneath the polish, a hardness in the eyes that suggested he was not someone to cross. "I appreciate your interest," Jacob said carefully. "But as I said, I have made no decisions. When and if I do, I will work with people I trust." Brennan's smile tightened slightly. "I understand, but please consider this." He pulled a business card from his wallet and held it out. "The market for these items is very specific. There are not many people who can properly evaluate Civil War artifacts, especially if what you found is as significant as I have heard. Some dealers might take advantage of your unfamiliarity with the field. I would not want to see that happen." Jacob took the card reluctantly, more to end the conversation than from any real interest. "I will keep it in mind." "Do you know what you have found?" Brennan asked suddenly, his tone shifting to something more direct. "Has anyone examined it properly?" "That is not your concern. Actually, Mr. Stoltzfus, it might be. You see, items from the Civil War era, especially those found on private property, can have complicated legal histories, ownership questions, provenance issues, even claims from the federal government in certain cases. It would be unfortunate if you went to all this trouble, only to discover the items must be surrendered to the state." The implied threat was subtle but unmistakable. Jacob met Brennan's eyes steadily. "If the law requires something of me, I will comply, but I will do so in my own time and with proper counsel. Not because a stranger shows up at my door making veiled suggestions." For a moment Brennan's professional mask slipped, revealing something colder beneath. Then the smile returned, bright and empty. "Of course, I meant no offense. I am simply trying to be helpful. But please, keep my card. And Mr. Stoltzfus, one more thing. In my experience, Once word gets out about a discovery like this, you will be inundated with offers, requests, even demands. Some people in this business are not as scrupulous as I am. They may try to intimidate you, pressure you, or worse. If you find yourself in need of protection, of someone who knows how to handle these situations, I would be happy to assist. We take care of our own, Jacob said firmly. Brennan nodded and returned to his car. As he drove away, Sarah appeared at Jacob's side, having watched the entire exchange from the window. "That man troubles me," she said quietly. "Me as well. He knows too much, arrived too quickly. Someone told him specifically about what we found." David Kepler, Jacob considered. Possibly word has simply spread faster than we anticipated. Either way, Brennan's visit confirms what Martha said. We are running out of time to take decisions in private. That afternoon, Martha called with news. Her conservator friend, a man named Harold Chen, could come the following day to work on the iron box. He would bring proper tools and equipment, and if all went well, they should be able to open it without damaging the content. Harold Chen arrived precisely when Martha said he would, driving a van filled with specialized equipment. He was a small man in his 40s, bespectacled and soft-spoken, with the careful movements of someone who spent his days working with fragile things. Martha had vouched for his discretion, and Jacob found himself trusting the man almost immediately. There was no calculation in his eyes, no hidden agenda, only genuine professional interest in the puzzle before him. In Jacob's workshop, Harold examined the iron box with intense focus, photographing it from every angle, measuring it, testing the metal with small instruments Jacob did not recognize. "This is quality work," he murmured. "The box itself is hand-forged iron, probably made by a skilled blacksmith. The lock is equally well crafted. Whoever made this intended it to last, and to resist casual attempts at opening." "Can you open it without destroying what is inside?" Jacob asked. "I believe so. The lock mechanism is frozen, but the metal itself is still sound. I will need to be patient, work slowly, but yes, I can open it." Harold looked up at Jacob. "Mrs. Keene has explained the context of this discovery. I want you to know that I understand the sensitive nature of what you have found. Whatever is in this box, I will document it professionally and discreetly." The process took most of the afternoon. Harold worked with tiny tools, applying careful pressure to the lock mechanism, using penetrating oil and patience to coax the frozen tumblers back to life. Jacob watched in silence, impressed by the man's concentration and skill. Daniel came and went, bringing water and checking on progress. Sarah looked in once, her presence a quiet reminder that the entire family waited to see what would be revealed. Finally, as the late afternoon sun slanted through the workshop windows, there was a soft click. Harold sat back with a satisfied expression. "There. The lock is open. Would you like to do the honors, Mr. Stoltzfus?" Jacob stepped forward, his heart beating harder than he expected. Whatever lay in this box had been sealed away for more than 160 years, hidden by a Union captain and his bride, as testimony to some injustice they had witnessed. The weight of that history pressed down on him as he placed his hands on the lid. He lifted it slowly. Inside, protected by layers of oiled cloth, lay an assortment of items. Documents, first and foremost. Official papers with seals and signatures, yellowed but still legible. Beneath those, a small velvet bag that proved to contain more gold coins, and at the bottom, wrapped in silk that had once been white, but had darkened with age, a glass photographic plate. Harold's eyes widened. An ambrotype, a Civil War-era photograph. "May I?" Jacob nodded, and Harold lifted the plate with gloved hands, holding it up to the light. The image showed a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, with dark hair and serious eyes. She wore a simple dress and a distinctive locket on a chain around her neck. The photograph had been taken with the painstaking care of early photography, the subject frozen in time with an intensity that made her seem almost alive. "This must be Elizabeth Hartwell," Martha said softly, appearing at Jacob's shoulder. She had been documenting everything with her camera, but now she lowered it, simply staring at the image. After all these years, we finally know what she looked like. Jacob studied the face in the photograph. There was strength there, and intelligence, and something else, determination perhaps, or resolve. This was a woman who had agreed to marry a Union captain and help him protect dangerous secrets. This was a woman who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, taking those secrets with her. "Look at the locket," Harold said, adjusting his glasses. "See how it catches the light? That is quite distinctive. If that locket still exists, it would be important physical evidence connecting this photograph to the actual person." But it was the documents that drew Jacob's attention most strongly. He lifted them carefully, unfolding them with gentle hands. They were railway land certificates, dozens of them, each one granting rights to property in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Virginia. The dates ranged from 1855 to 1862, and the signatures at the bottom bore names Jacob did not recognize, but which Martha clearly did. Her sharp intake of breath confirmed it. "Jacob, do you understand what these are?" Martha's hands trembled slightly as she photographed each document. "These are not just historical artifacts, Jacob. These are legal instruments, land grants issued by the federal government to railway companies during the 1850s and early 1860s. They represent thousands of acres, possibly tens of thousands." "I do not understand," Jacob said. "Why would Captain Hargrove hide railway documents?" "Because," Martha said slowly, her mind clearly racing through historical connections, "these documents prove ownership of land. And if they were hidden rather than filed properly, it suggests something was very wrong with how they were obtained or used." Harold had been examining one of the certificates with his magnifying glass. "Look at this notation in the margin. It appears to be written in different ink," added later. "It says fraudulent transfer, Hartwell witness, elimination ordered." The words hung in the air like smoke. Jacob read them again, his mind struggling to accept what they implied. Someone ordered the Hartwells eliminated because they witnessed fraud. "It would explain Elizabeth's disappearance," Martha said quietly. "If she knew about criminal activity involving railway land, if she had proof of it, she would have been a threat to very powerful interests." Daniel, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "Then we are in danger too. If these documents still matter, if they still prove something that powerful people want hidden, then we have put ourselves in the same position as Elizabeth Hartwell." Jacob looked at his son, seeing the fear but also the determination in his face. Daniel was right. They had stumbled into something far larger than a simple treasure discovery. They had uncovered evidence of a crime, possibly murder, committed by people with the resources and will to silence witnesses. "We need legal counsel immediately," Martha said. "Not just any attorney, but someone who specializes in historical property law and has the courage to stand up to corporate interests. Rebecca Hoffman is that person. I am calling her right now." She pulled out her cell phone and stepped outside to make the call. Harold continued photographing and documenting each item, his professional focus unshaken by the revelations. Jacob stood holding one of the railway certificates, reading the names of the companies and the tracts of land, described in precise legal language. One certificate in particular caught his attention. It described property along the Susquehanna River, land that had been granted to the Pennsylvania Central Railway Company in 18. It was signed by someone named Cornelius Hartwell, dated March 1860. "That would be Elizabeth's father," Martha said, returning to the workshop. "He was a prominent landowner before the war. I had always wondered what happened to his holding. This suggests he held railway certificates, possibly as investments or guarantees of some kind. Or he discovered they were fraudulent and threatened to expose the fraud," Jacob said. Martha nodded grimly. "Rebecca can see us tomorrow morning. She is clearing her schedule. She said this takes absolute priority, and that we should not discuss this with anyone else until we meet with her. Jacob, she also said, we should consider contacting the police. If there is still danger, From events that happened over 160 years ago? Daniel asked skeptically. From the implications of those events, Martha corrected. These railway certificates, if they are indeed fraudulent, could affect current land ownership. Modern railway companies, corporations built on the foundations of these original lines, might have significant legal exposure if this evidence becomes public. That is not ancient history. That is current financial liability potentially worth millions of dollars. Jacob felt the weight of this realization settle over him. He had thought he was dealing with historical artifacts, items of academic and sentimental value. He had not understood that he was holding documents that could unravel corporate empires, that could redistribute wealth and property on a massive scale. The gold coins were nothing compared to the value of the truth these papers represented. Thomas Brennan, he said suddenly, the antiquities dealer who came yesterday, he knew, he must have known about these documents. That is why he came so quickly, why he was so eager to make an offer. Did he make threats? Martha asked sharply. Subtle ones? Warnings about other dealers who might be less scrupulous. Implications that I might face legal complications if I did not handle things properly. Martha's expression hardened. Then he is not working independently. He represents someone with deep knowledge of what you found. Someone who wants those documents buried again or destroyed. Rebecca needs to know about this immediately. She made another call, speaking in low, urgent tones. When she finished, she turned back to Jacob with obvious concern. She says to secure everything, tell no one else, and do not let anyone onto your property without witnesses present. She will be here first thing tomorrow morning. That evening, Jacob gathered his family again. This time the mood was different, heavier with the understanding that they faced something potentially dangerous. He showed them the railway documents, explained what Martha and Harold had discovered, told them about the implications. We should give it all to the authorities tonight, Amos said. Let them protect it. Let them deal with the consequences. And what will the authorities do? Ruth asked. How do we know they are not connected to the same interests that want these documents suppressed? That is paranoid thinking, Amos protested. Is it? Isaac spoke from his corner, his aged voice cutting through the debate. Powerful people protect their power. They always have. If these documents threatened corporate empires worth millions, do you truly believe those empires will simply accept exposure and defeat? They will fight. They will use every resource at their disposal. Then what should father do? Daniel asked. Isaac looked at Jacob with eyes that held both wisdom and worry. He should do what Elizabeth Hartwell and Captain Hargrove intended. He should bring the truth to light. But he should do it in a way that protects himself and his family. That means working with people who can navigate the English legal system, people who understand how to fight powerful interests. Sarah had been silent throughout the discussion, but now she spoke. Jacob, I trust your judgment. You have always been a careful man, a thoughtful man. Whatever you decide, I will support you. But I ask one thing. Keep our family safe. If at any point this becomes too dangerous, promise me you will step back. I promise, Jacob said, though he wondered if stepping back was even possible now. They had opened a door that could not be easily closed. That night, Jacob set up a watch rotation with Daniel and Levi, who had been brought into full confidence earlier in the day. They took turns staying awake, keeping an eye on the workshop where the documents were secured in a locked cabinet. Jacob had reinforced with additional hardware. It seemed excessive, perhaps even paranoid, as Amos had suggested, but Jacob could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. Near midnight during Daniel's watch, a car drove slowly past the farm. It did not stop, did not even slow noticeably, but it was unusual enough to warrant attention. Few people drove this road at night, and those who did were usually neighbors returning from town. This car was unfamiliar, its headlights cutting through the darkness like searching eyes. Daniel woke Jacob to report it. They stood together in the darkness of the workshop, watching through the window as the car made another pass an hour later. This time it did slow, just slightly, as it approached the farm. Tomorrow we talk to the attorney, Jacob said quietly, and we make copies of everything. Multiple copies, stored in different places. If someone wants to silence us the way they silence the Hartwells, they will find it accomplishes nothing. The truth will already be beyond their reach. Morning came with a cold autumn rain, the kind that turned dirt roads to mud and made the fields glisten like hammered metal. Rebecca Hoffman arrived in a practical sedan, accompanied by Martha. She was younger than Jacob expected, perhaps 40, with short dark hair and the alert eyes of someone who made her living noticing details others missed. She did not waste time with pleasantries. In the workshop, with the rain drumming on the roof above them, she examined each document with fierce concentration. She photographed them, made notes, occasionally asked questions that Jacob could not answer. When she finished, she sat back and removed her glasses, rubbing her eyes as if they hurt. "Mr. Stoltzfus, do you understand what you have here?" "I believe I understand that they represent something significant," Jacob replied carefully. Rebecca leaned forward, her intensity filling the small space. "These documents prove that the Pennsylvania Central Railway Company, which later became part of the modern Eastern Rail Consortium, obtained thousands of acres of land through fraudulent means. They forged signatures, intimidated witnesses, and quite possibly murdered anyone who threatened to expose them. The Hartwell family owned legitimate certificates that contradicted the railway company's claims. Cornelius Hartwell must have discovered the fraud and refused to remain silent. Can you prove all of this from these documents alone?" Martha asked. "With these documents combined with historical records and modern land surveys, yes. The railway certificates you found include property that is currently owned by corporations, municipalities, even the federal government. If these certificates prove the original transfers were fraudulent, it opens up questions of legal ownership that could affect thousands of current property holders." Jacob felt his stomach tighten. "You are saying this affects people today? Living people who have done nothing wrong?" "Unfortunately, yes. Property law is complicated, especially when dealing with historical fraud. Some innocent parties might find their land titles challenged. But that is not your fault, Mr. Stoltzfus. The fraud was committed 160 years ago. You are merely bringing it to light." "What should I do?" Rebecca stood and paced to the window, watching the rain. "Normally I would advise filing these documents with the State Historical Commission and letting the legal process unfold naturally. But given that someone has already approached you, someone who clearly knows what you found and wants to control it, I think we need to move more aggressively. We need to go public with this discovery in a way that makes it impossible to suppress." "Public?" Jacob felt a chill run through him. The Amish avoided publicity, avoided drawing attention from the outside world. It was fundamental to their way of life. "I know this goes against your traditions," Rebecca said gently. "But consider what happened to Elizabeth Hart. She tried to keep these documents secret until the right moment, and she disappeared. If you keep this quiet, if you work through official channels slowly, you give interested parties time to pressure you, threaten you, or worse. But if the entire story becomes public immediately, if news outlets cover it, if historians and legal experts are all examining it simultaneously, then you become too visible to silence." Daniel, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "What about our community? The attention this would bring, the reporters, the cameras, it would disrupt everything." "Yes, it would," Rebecca acknowledged. "For a time, but the alternative might be far worse. I am not trying to frighten you, but you need to understand the stakes. These documents represent potential liability in the millions of dollars for multiple corporations. People have killed for far less." Jacob looked at Sarah, who had joined them when Rebecca arrived. Her face showed the strain of these revelations, but her eyes were clear and steady. She gave him a small nod. Whatever he decided, she would stand with him. "Captain Hargrove wrote that the truth must be told," Jacob said slowly. "He and Elizabeth sacrificed everything trying to protect these documents so that someday justice could be served. I cannot dishonor that sacrifice by putting my own comfort above their mission. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. Then we move forward. I will contact a journalist I trust, someone who specializes in investigative historical reporting. I will also file preliminary documents with the county court, establishing your legal claim to what you found and putting the railway certificates into the public record. By this time tomorrow, this story will be beyond anyone's ability to suppress. And then what happens? Then we fight. Corporations will challenge the validity of the document. They will hire experts to question the authenticity, to argue that too much time has passed for the fraud to matter legally. We will hire our own experts. It will be a long process, possibly years. But at the end of it, the truth will be established and justice, however delayed, will be served. Jacob nodded slowly. He thought of his purchase of the barn for $20, of Thunder's insistent pawing at the floor, of the brass ring hidden beneath a century of dirt. Everything had led to this moment, to this decision. Perhaps it was providence, as Sarah believed. Perhaps it was simply chance. Either way, he could not turn away from it now. Do what you must do, he told Rebecca. But I have one condition. Any money that comes from this, any settlement or compensation, I do not want it. It should go to historical preservation, to education, to purposes that honor the memory of those who died protecting these documents. Rebecca smiled for the first time since arriving. I think Captain Hargrove and Elizabeth would approve of that sentiment, Mr. Stoltzfus. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of activity. Rebecca worked from Martha's Historical Society office, making calls and filing documents. A journalist named Peter Vance arrived from Philadelphia. A man in his 50s with the weathered face of someone who had spent his career chasing difficult stories. He interviewed Jacob for hours, photographed the documents with Rebecca's supervision, and promised that his article would run in the morning edition of the Philadelphia Inquirer. But as the day wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. The car that had driven past the previous night returned, this time parking on the road just beyond Jacob's property line. Two men sat inside, making no effort to hide their presence. They were watching, and they wanted Jacob to know he was being watched. Levy and several other men from the community arrived without being asked, understanding instinctively that Jacob might need support. They positioned themselves around the property, not armed because the Amish were pacifists, but present and watchful. Their solidarity spoke to something deeper than mere friendship. This was about protecting one of their own, about standing firm against outside pressure. Thomas Brennan returned that evening, this time with two other men. They were dressed in suits, carrying briefcases, projecting an air of corporate authority. Daniel met them at the property line, refusing to let them onto the land without Jacob's explicit permission. Jacob walked out to meet them, flanked by Daniel and Levi. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained dark and threatening, clouds rolling overhead like smoke. Mr. Stoltzfus, Brennan said, his earlier friendliness replaced with barely concealed hostility. I understand you have been very busy today, filing documents, speaking with journalists. That is unfortunate. My associates and I came to make you a final offer, a very generous offer, for everything you found in that barn. I am not interested in any offer, Jacob said. One of the other men stepped forward. He was older than Brennan, with silver hair and the cold eyes of someone accustomed to power. Mr. Stoltzfus, I am Richard Calloway, Chief Legal Counsel for Eastern Rail Consortium. I want to make certain you understand the implications of what you are doing. Those documents you claim to have found are over a century and a half old. Their validity is questionable at best. Pursuing this matter will accomplish nothing except to embroil you in lengthy, expensive litigation that you cannot possibly win. Then why are you here? Jacob asked quietly. If the documents are meaningless, why do you care what I do with them? Calloway's jaw tightened. We care because spurious claims create market uncertainty. They affect property values, complicate development projects, waste the court's time. We are prepared to purchase the entire collection from you for $2 million. That is more than fair compensation for some old papers and coins. $2 million. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. Jacob saw Daniel's eyes widen, saw Levi's sharp intake of breath. It was more money than anyone in their community could imagine, enough to secure futures for generations. The answer is no, Jacob said. These documents belong to history, not to corporations trying to hide their past crimes. Calloway's expression turned hard. Then you are making a serious mistake. We have resources you cannot imagine. Mr. Stoltz, false. Legal resources, political resources. We will fight this with everything we have. And you, a simple farmer with no understanding of how the modern world works, you will lose everything. Perhaps, Jacob acknowledged, but I will lose it knowing I did what was right. Can you say the same? The men left, but their threats lingered like poison in the air. That night, Jacob barely slept again. He sat in his workshop, surrounded by the evidence of a crime committed before his grandparents were born, and wondered if he had made the right choice. $2 million could have transformed not just his family, but the entire community. New equipment, repaired barns, security for the elderly, all of it turned away because of principle. Yet when he thought of Elizabeth Hartwell, of her face in the photograph with its expression of determined courage, he knew he could not have chosen differently. She had sacrificed her life for this truth. He could at least risk his comfort for it. Morning came with news that spread through the community like wildfire. Peter Vance's article had run on the front page of the Inquirer, complete with photographs of the documents and a detailed account of the historical fraud. By noon, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. Television crews arrived in the area, though Jacob refused all interviews, directing them instead to Rebecca and Martha. Bishop Eli called an emergency meeting of the district. Jacob attended with a heavy heart, knowing that many would be angry about the attention he had brought to their community. The meeting was held at the church building, a simple structure used only for worship and important gatherings. 200 people filled the space, sitting on the traditional backless benches. The atmosphere was tense, divided. Jacob could see it in their faces. Some looked at him with pride, others with concern, still others with outright disapproval. Bishop Eli stood at the front, his white beard catching the afternoon light that streamed through the windows. He raised his hands for silence, and the murmuring ceased immediately. "We are here because one of our own has made a decision that affects us all," Eli began. "Jacob Stoltzfors has chosen to bring to light a historical truth, knowing it would bring the attention of the world to our doorstep. Some of you are troubled by this. Some feel he should have remained silent, should have let the past remain buried. I want to address these concerns directly." He paused, his eyes sweeping the congregation. "Our is separation from the world. Yes, we do not seek its approval, its wealth, or its recognition, but we are not called to help the world hide its sins. When injustice is revealed to us, when we are given the means to bring truth to light, we have a responsibility to act, even when that action is difficult." David Kepler stood, his face flushed with anger. "Bishop, with respect, Jacob has put us all at risk. There are reporters everywhere, corporations threatening legal action, strangers driving past our farms taking pictures. Our children are frightened. Our peace is destroyed. And for what? For documents about crimes committed by people long dead." "No," Isaac's voice rang out from where he sat near the back. The old man stood slowly, his aged frame somehow commanding attention. "Not for documents, for Elizabeth Hartwell, for Captain Hargrove, for every person who has been silenced by powerful interests throughout history. My grandson has done what few men have the courage to do. He has chosen principle over comfort, truth over peace. And yes, it has cost us our privacy and our ease. But some things are worth that cost." A murmur ran through the congregation. but Jacob could not tell if it was agreement or disagreement. Then, one by one, people began to stand. Levi first, then Daniel, then Ruth, and her husband. Sarah stood beside Jacob, taking his hand in a public gesture that drew gasps from some of the more conservative members, but still more rose, until nearly half the congregation was on their feet. "We stand with Jacob," Levi said simply. "Whatever comes, we stand with him." Bishop Eli nodded, satisfaction evident in his weathered face. "Then it is settled. This community will not abandon one of its own in his hour of need. We will protect him, support him, and help him see this through to whatever end God intends. Those who cannot accept this are free to express their concerns, but they will do so without undermining our unity." David Kepler sat down, his face dark with displeasure, but his silence signaling acceptance of the bishop's ruling. The following days brought a storm of activity that tested the community's resolve. Legal papers arrived daily. Reporters camped along the road leading to Jacob's farm. The Eastern Rail Consortium filed an emergency injunction seeking to have all the documents seized and placed under court seal pending authenticity verification. Rebecca filed countermotions, arguing that the documents were legitimate historical artifacts with clear provenance. But it was what Daniel discovered that changed everything. He had been working to reinforce the barn's foundation, both to stabilize the structure and to ensure that no other hidden chambers existed. The work was slow and methodical, examining every stone and timber of the original construction. 3 days after the story broke, his shovel struck something solid near the southwest corner. He dug carefully, uncovering what appeared to be a small wooden box buried just beneath the surface. The wood was rotted, crumbling at his touch, but inside, wrapped in oiled leather that had protected it from moisture, was a silver locket. Daniel brought it to Jacob immediately, his hands trembling as he held it out. "Father, look at the design. Look at the engraving." Jacob took the locket, feeling its weight in his palm. The silver was tarnished black in places, but the workmanship was exquisite. On the front, engraved in flowing script, were the initials. He opened it carefully, and inside found 2 things, a tiny lock of dark hair and a scrap of paper with words written in faded ink. "To my beloved William, wear this close to your heart as you carry mine into battle. Your Elizabeth." But it was not the inscription that made Jacob's breath catch. It was what else the locket contained. Wedged behind the paper, nearly invisible, was a small piece of lead, a bullet fragment, deformed and dark with age. Martha arrived within the hour, summoned by a phone call from Daniel. She examined the locket with the same intensity she had brought to everything else, photographing it from every angle before comparing it to the ambrotype photograph they had found in the iron box. "It is the same locket," she confirmed. "Look at the distinctive scroll work around the edges, the way the chain is attached. This is definitely the locket Elizabeth is wearing in the photograph." "And the bullet fragment?" Jacob asked. Martha's expression turned grey. "If this locket was buried near the barn, and it contains a bullet fragment, it is that Elizabeth was shot here. This might be where she died, where they buried her." The implications hung heavy in the workshop. This was no longer just about historical documents and corporate fraud. This was a murder scene, and the evidence had been waiting beneath the ground for more than 160 years. Rebecca made immediate calls to the state police and the county coroner's office. Within hours, forensic investigators arrived, carefully excavating the area where Daniel had found the locket. They worked methodically, sifting through soil that had lain undisturbed since before the Civil War ended. What they found turned a historical mystery into a modern criminal investigation. Beneath where the locket had been buried, they discovered human remains. The bones were fragmentary, degraded by time and soil conditions, but enough remained for analysis. And lodged in what appeared to be a rib bone was another bullet fragment, matching in composition and design to the one from the locket. Jacob stood with Daniel and Sarah, watching the forensic team work with their careful tools and evidence bags. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the field, and somewhere in the distance, thunder whinnied, perhaps sensing the gravity of what was unfolding. "They killed her here," Sarah said quietly. "They murdered a young woman for trying to tell the truth, and they buried her like she was nothing, like she did not matter." "But she did matter," Jacob replied. "And now, finally, everyone will know what happened to her. Her story will be told." A state police detective named Sarah Morrison approached them, her notebook in hand. She was a tall woman in her 40s, with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much tragedy. "Mr. Stoltzfus, we will need to expand our investigation. This is now a cold case homicide, and while the perpetrators are certainly long dead, we need to establish the full facts for the historical record." "Whatever you need," Jacob said. The discovery of Elizabeth's remains shifted everything. What had been a legal battle over historical documents became a media sensation. National news networks descended on Lancaster County, transforming Jacob's quiet farm into the center of a story that captured the nation's imagination. A young woman murdered for defending truth. Her body hidden for over a century, her killer never brought to justice. It was the kind of story that transcended time and touched something fundamental in the human heart. But more importantly, it changed the legal landscape. Rebecca filed new motions, arguing that the documents were not merely historical artifacts, but evidence in a murder investigation. The Eastern Rail Consortium's attempts to suppress or seal the documents now looked like an attempt to obstruct justice, even if the justice was more than 160 years delayed. The pressure on the consortium intensified. Shareholders demanded answers. The board of directors faced questions about the company's origins and whether modern leadership bore any responsibility for historical crimes. Stock prices fluctuated as investors worried about potential legal exposure. Then on a cold November morning, Thomas Brennan was arrested. Detective Morrison had been investigating his connections to the consortium and discovered that he had been hired specifically to recover or destroy the documents before they became public. Electronic communications, emails and app messages showed a conspiracy to intimidate Jacob, to make threats, and if necessary to steal the documents by force. Brennan had been promised a substantial payment for ensuring the papers never reached the courts. Jacob learned of the arrest from Rebecca, who called with barely contained satisfaction in her voice. "They overreached," she explained. "In trying to protect themselves, they committed new crimes: conspiracy, attempted theft of historical artifacts, witness intimidation. The federal authorities are now involved because some of the communications crossed state lines." "What does this mean for the documents?" Jacob asked. "It means we have won, at least the first battle. The consortium cannot suppress the truth now without looking even more guilty."